Section 1. The apex predators of the galaxy. The Zalvoran were the undisputed apex predators of the known galaxy. To them, the cosmos was little more than a vast battlefield where only the strong thrived and the weak were crushed underfoot. For centuries, they had moved from system to system, encountering countless species, all of which paled in comparison to their raw might. No civilization had ever posed a true challenge, reinforcing their belief that they alone were the pinnacle of evolution, the only true Deathworlders. Vora's 9, their homeworld, was a testament to their superiority. It was a planet so unforgiving that no other species could even hope to colonize it. Towering volcanoes spewed toxic gases into the sky, acid storms scoured the surface, and monstrous creatures lurked in every shadow. It was a world where survival was not just a challenge, but a constant war. The Zalvoran had emerged from this crucible of brutality stronger than any other species in the galaxy, their bodies hardened by generations of unrelenting hardship. Their exoskeletal armor was as strong as starship hull plating, their muscles capable of tearing lesser creatures apart, and their minds sharpened by an evolutionary history that demanded absolute cunning and ruthlessness. Because of this, the Zalvoran had always viewed other species as lesser beings. The so-called civilized races of the galaxy were soft, fragile things that had never known true struggle. They hid behind technology, relying on machines to do what their own bodies could not. To the Zalvoran, this was a mark of weakness. True strength came from within, from blood, from war, from the crucible of survival. Their empires stretched across dozens of systems, expanding relentlessly as they conquered and subjugated weaker civilizations. The Zalvoran did not negotiate. They did not make treaties or alliances unless it was out of sheer necessity. They took what they wanted, crushed any who resisted, and continued their advance, secure in the knowledge that they were the dominant force in the galaxy. That was, until they detected an anomaly on the fringes of their territory. A fleet of unknown vessels had entered a contested system near the edge of Zalvoran space. This was not an uncommon occurrence. Lesser species often wandered too close to their borders, either out of ignorance or sheer stupidity. The usual response was swift and brutal. The intruding ships would be given a single warning to turn back. If they did not comply, they were obliterated. High Warlord Karvek, Supreme Commander of the Zalvoran 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, sat upon his throne in the warship Bloodfang, observing the unknown vessels through the glowing tactical displays. The ships were of an unfamiliar design, sleek, angular, with reinforced hull plating that suggested a species accustomed to war. That alone was unusual. Most civilizations the Zalvoran encountered had little in the way of true military capability, relying instead on automated defenses or massed fleets that crumbled under superior tactics and firepower. Karvek narrowed his eyes, mandibles clicking in thought. There was something different about these newcomers. Their movements were precise, deliberate, not the erratic and hesitant maneuvers of a species unprepared for war. He had seen such movements before, among his own kind. "Have we identified them?" he rumbled, his deep voice resonating through the command chamber. One of his officers, a scarred veteran named Corvin, saluted and replied, "They transmit under the banner of the United Terran Confederation. Unknown species designation. They appear to be Deathworld adapted, though our biological scans are inconclusive." Karvek let out a slow, thoughtful growl. Another Deathworld species? That was impossible. The Zalvoran were the only ones. No other race could claim that title, not truly. They had encountered species from hostile planets before, but none of them had been true Deathworlders. None of them had been worthy. "Send the standard challenge," Karvek commanded. "Let them prove their worth. If they refuse, they die." A moment later, the transmission was sent, an ancient tradition among the Zalvoran. A single message, simple and direct. You stand before the Zalvoran. Submit or be annihilated. Prove your strength, or perish as the weak always do. In the past, such a message had resulted in one of two responses. The first and most common was immediate surrender. Most species recognized that they could not hope to stand against the Zalvoran and would throw themselves at their mercy. The second was resistance, often out of desperation rather than any true hope of victory. These fools fought and died, their fleets shattered, their worlds burned. But the response from the United Terran Confederation was different. The audio transmission came through first, a voice speaking in near-perfect Standard Galactic. It was deep, confident, carrying none of the fear or arrogance Karvek was accustomed to. "This is Captain Elias Ward of the United Terran Confederation. We do not submit. We do not kneel. But we will talk if you're capable of diplomacy." Karvek's mandibles twitched in irritation. There was no fear in the human's voice, no pleading or bravado, just calm certainty. He had spoken as if he were addressing an equal, not a superior. The warlord's clawed fingers tightened around the armrest of his throne. "Fascinating," he muttered. Corvin, standing beside him, let out a low hiss. "They dare defy us?" Karvek shook his head.
"No.
They do not defy. They stand firm. There is a difference." For the first time in centuries, Karvek felt something stir in his chest. Not rage, not contempt, but curiosity. The Zalvoran had thought themselves alone, the only true Deathworlders in the galaxy. But now, standing before them, was a species that showed no fear. Perhaps they had been wrong. Perhaps they were not alone after all. Section 2. First contact with humanity. For the first time in centuries, High Warlord Karvek found himself intrigued by another species. The humans, as they called themselves, had not responded with fear or hostility. They had not groveled for mercy, nor had they postured with empty bravado. Instead, their leader, Captain Elias Ward, had spoken with an unshakable confidence, something Karvek had never encountered from a non-Zalvoran. Karvek leaned forward in his command throne, his glowing amber eyes fixed on the display that showed the human fleet. Their ships were unlike those of weaker species, efficient, durable, built with reinforced plating that suggested a history of war. He knew at a glance that these were not vessels of a prey species. These were ships meant to endure. "Open a visual channel," Karvek commanded. The display flickered, and a moment later, the image of Captain Elias Ward appeared. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face that bore the marks of experience. His expression was calm, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that sent a flicker of recognition through Karvek's mind. That was the gaze of a warrior. Ward inclined his head slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement, but not submission. "High Warlord Karvek, I presume?" Karvek's mandibles clicked together in amusement. This human knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't defying the Zalvoran outright, but he wasn't bowing either. He was testing the waters, gauging the reaction, much like a predator sizing up an unknown rival. "You presume correctly," Karvek rumbled. "You stand in Zalvoran space, human. Your presence here demands a challenge. Will you fight, or will you flee?" Ward's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smirk. "You assume those are only two options." Karvek tilted his head, intrigued. "Are they not?" The human leaned slightly forward, his blue eyes locking onto Karvek's own. "We have a third option, Warlord. We talk." A silence fell over the bridge of Bloodfang. The Zalvoran officers exchanged glances, their mandibles clicking softly in disbelief. No species had ever spoken to Karvek like this. No species had ever dared suggest a path other than surrender or war. Karvek let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "Talk. What could words offer me that combat cannot?" Ward's expression remained neutral. "An understanding. A realization that your people and mine may not be so different." Karvek studied him for a long moment. "A bold claim. One that you will have to prove." He rose from his throne, towering over the screen. "I issue a personal challenge, Captain Ward. A duel. You and I, blade to blade. If you refuse, I will consider your kind weak, and I will destroy your fleet." The Zalvoran warriors around Karvek let out low growls of approval. This was how things were done among their kind. Strength was not something one simply claimed, It had to be demonstrated. If the humans were truly as formidable as Ward suggested, this would be their chance to prove it. Ward, to his credit, did not hesitate. "Accepted," he said without pause. Karvek felt a flicker of surprise. He had expected resistance, maybe even an attempt to negotiate a different form of contest. But no, this human had agreed instantly. That, more than anything, intrigued him. A short time later, aboard a neutral meeting ground, a barren asteroid on the fringes of the system, Karvek and Ward stood face to face. The Zalvoran warlord towered over the human, his thick exoskeletal plating gleaming under the dim light. He held a massive, curved blade in his clawed hands, the weapon humming with energy. Ward, by contrast, carried a simpler weapon, a standard-issue Terran combat knife. It was small, unimpressive in comparison, but the way he held it spoke volumes. He was no stranger to battle. The duel began with an explosive clash. Karvek moved first, swinging his massive blade in a strike meant to test Ward's reflexes. The human dodged, fast, rolling under the attack with practiced ease. He countered immediately, slashing at Karvek's exposed side, but the warlord twisted, avoiding the blow with the precision of a seasoned warrior. They fought, the battle stretching on longer than Karvek had expected. Most species would have fallen within moments, unable to match his strength and speed. But Ward held his ground, dodging and countering with an efficiency that spoke of years of brutal training. Karvek could feel his own blood pumping with exhilaration. It had been too long since he had faced a worthy opponent. Ward was smaller, weaker in raw power, but what he lacked in physical strength, he made up for with sheer resilience and tactical brilliance. Blow after blow, they clashed, until finally, Karvek managed to land a decisive strike, sending Ward crashing to the ground. But even then, the human did not surrender. He pushed himself up, wiping blood from his mouth, and grinned. "Not bad," Ward said, breathing heavily. "But I've had worse." Karvek let out a deep, rumbling laugh. He had won, but barely. He had expected an easy victory, yet Ward had forced him to fight harder than he had in years. The fact that this human still stood, still smiled, after taking a blow that would have shattered most beings, was a testament to something Karvek had never considered. Humans were not just another species. They were something else entirely. "You are strong, Captain Ward," Karvek admitted. "Stronger than I expected." He extended a clawed hand. "Perhaps you and I are not so different after all." Ward clasped the warlord's forearm in a firm grip. "Glad you're starting to see it." From that moment on, the Zalvoran perception of humanity changed. Karvek had met his match, not in sheer strength, but in spirit. The humans were not simply another prey species, nor were they a force to be easily crushed. They were something new, something dangerous, and perhaps something worthy. Section 3. The Trials on Vora's 9. The duel between Captain Elias Ward and High Warlord Karvek had changed everything. Though the Zalvoran had emerged victorious, Karvek knew the truth. This had not been an easy win. The human had pushed him to his limits, displaying a level of endurance, strategy, and sheer determination that no other species had before. The Zalvoran had long believed themselves the only true Deathworlders, but for the first time, Karvek questioned that belief. And he wanted to be sure. Thus, the invitation had been sent. "If your people are truly as strong as you claim, then let them prove it. Come to Vora's 9. Survive our world. Only then will we speak of alliances." Ward had not hesitated. Now, as the human shuttle descended onto the surface of Vora's 9, Karvek watched from the cliffs of the great Zalvoran fortress city of Exorvesh. The humans had arrived with a small team, 5 warriors, including Ward himself. No hesitation, no second thoughts. They had accepted the challenge without question, without fear. The air of Vora's 9 was thick with toxins that would kill most species in hours. The terrain was a nightmare, jagged obsidian mountains, molten rivers, and great storms that rolled in without warning, bringing acid rain and lightning that could crack stone. It was a world that bred monsters, both in flesh and in spirit. The test was simple. Survive for 5 days. Nothing more, nothing less. Karvek and his warriors observed from a distance, tracking the humans as they moved through the wastelands. The first challenge came swiftly, a pack of Vorian raptors, 6-legged reptilian beasts with talons that could gut a man in a heartbeat. The creatures struck fast, circling the humans in coordinated attacks. Karvek expected the humans to retreat, or, at the very least, show signs of fear. Instead, they adapted. Rather than fighting as individuals, the humans moved as a unit. One covered the other's blind spot, another drew the raptors' attention, forcing them into a kill zone where concentrated fire took them down one by one. The efficiency of their teamwork was unlike anything Karvek had seen before. Even the Zalvoran, for all their battle prowess, did not fight like this. They relied on individual dominance, on their sheer overwhelming strength. The humans fought with strategy. But the raptors were only the beginning. By the second day, the temperature had soared to unbearable levels, the sun turning the wastelands into a furnace. Zalvoran warriors, watching from a distance, whispered among themselves. This was usually when lesser species began to falter. Water was scarce, the heat relentless. Even the Zalvoran, with their hardened physiology, struggled under these conditions. Yet the humans endured. They rationed their supplies with military precision. They scavenged, using knowledge Karvek had not expected them to possess. One of the human soldiers, an engineer, by the look of him, fashioned a crude water filtration system using materials scavenged from the wreckage of a fallen Zalvoran probe. Karvek watched in silence, his admiration growing. By the fourth night, a storm struck. It came without warning, as all storms on Voras 9 did. Winds howled like screaming demons, and the acid rain fell in torrents, burning through armor, scarring the landscape with every drop. The Zalvoran had prepared shelters long ago, fortified bunkers where they could wait out such tempests. The humans had no such refuge. Karvek and his warriors assumed this would be the breaking point. No species could withstand a storm of this magnitude without shelter. But the humans did not break. Instead of seeking refuge, they built one. Using nothing but their surroundings, they constructed a makeshift shelter in the side of a rocky canyon. They reinforced it with layers of scavenged metal, using tarps and sealants from their survival kits to create an insulated barrier against the toxic rain. They did not wait for the storm to pass. They fought against it, refusing to let the planet dictate their fate. By the time the storm subsided, Karvek knew. These were not just survivors. These were not just warriors. These were conquerors. And that thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. On the final day, Karvek and a contingent of his warriors approached the human encampment. The humans were battered, bruised, but still standing. Ward rose as Karvek approached, locking eyes with the warlord. "You have done what no other species has," Karvek admitted, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. "You have survived Voras 9. And not just survived, you have endured. You have conquered." Ward, ever the soldier, simply shrugged. "It's what we do." Karvek regarded him for a long moment. He had set out to prove humanity's weakness, to show them that the Zalvoran were the only true Deathworlders. Instead, he had found equals. No, not equals. Brothers. For the first time in Zalvoran history, another species had been acknowledged as worthy. For the first time, an alliance was not forged through war and subjugation, but through mutual respect. Karvek extended his clawed hand. Ward clasped it. The future of the galaxy had just changed forever. ####Section 4. The Deathworlder Pact. The moment High Warlord Karvek clasped Captain Elias Ward's hand, a silent understanding passed between them. This was no simple agreement. It was an acknowledgement of what had been proven over 5 grueling days on Voras 9, that humanity was not prey, nor was it just another species to be conquered. They were something far rarer in the vast, unforgiving galaxy. They were equals. The Zalvoran warriors watching the exchange stood in stunned silence. Many had doubted that any species could survive the trial, let alone endure it with such tenacity. The humans had fought, adapted, and persevered in a way that mirrored the very essence of the Zalvoran themselves. Now, as the dust settled and the last remnants of the storm faded from the horizon, an undeniable truth had been etched into the annals of history. Humanity had earned the respect of the Zalvoran. But respect alone would not be enough to secure the future. Karvek turned to his assembled warriors, his deep voice carrying across the gathered ranks. We have spent centuries believing ourselves to be the only true Deathworlders. We thought our struggle was unique, that no other species could claim to have endured as we have. He turned back to Ward, his mandibles clicking in thought. But we were wrong. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. The Zalvoran were not accustomed to hearing their warlord admit to being wrong. Karvek let the weight of his words settle before continuing. These humans did not just survive Vora's 9. They thrived upon it. They adapted to every challenge, fought as one, and endured as we do. They do not beg for mercy. They do not flinch in the face of death. They do not break. He gestured toward Ward and his team, his glowing amber eyes sweeping over them. This is the mark of a true Deathworld species. And for that, they are not our enemies. His next words were spoken with finality. They are our kin. A hushed silence followed, then a slow, building sound, the clicking of mandibles and the pounding of clawed fists against armored chests. The Zalvoran were warriors first and foremost, and they respected strength above all else. These humans had proven their worth in the most brutal way possible. They had passed the test of Vora's 9. Ward, standing tall despite his bruised and battered frame, gave a nod of appreciation. We didn't come here looking for war, Karvek. We came looking for understanding. Maybe we've found it. The Zalvoran warlord studied the human for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he drew his war blade. The polished metal gleamed under the dim light of the Vora's 9 sky. The Zalvoran warriors tensed, unsure of what was to come. Then, in a move that defied centuries of tradition, Karvek reversed the grip and offered the hilt to Ward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No Zalvoran warlord had ever given his weapon, his soul, to an outsider. It was an unthinkable gesture, a sign of ultimate respect. Ward, to his credit, did not hesitate. He accepted the blade with both hands, holding it with the reverence it deserved. Karvek spoke again, his voice firm. This is not a gift. It is a challenge. If humanity and the Zalvoran are to stand together, we will forge our own path, not as conquerors, not as prey and predator, but as warriors of the same blood. He turned to his people. Let it be known that from this day forth, the humans are bound to us. Let no Zalvoran raise a blade against them, for they are one of us. The roar that followed shook the very ground. The Zalvoran did not have allies. They had vassals, conquests, and enemies. But today, something new had been forged, a bond between two Deathworld species, one built not on submission but on shared struggle. This was not an alliance of convenience. It was a pact of survival. The Deathworlder Pact. #, the impact on the galaxy. News of the Zalvoran's alliance with humanity spread like wildfire. Across the known galaxy, empires and civilizations that had once feared the Zalvoran now turned their eyes to Earth, suddenly aware that the humans were not to be underestimated. The weaker species, those that had once relied on diplomacy, trade, and avoidance to stay in the Zalvoran's good graces, now wondered if humanity would bring a new era of war. Others saw opportunity, realizing that if the humans could stand as equals to the galaxy's most feared warriors, then perhaps they were worth allying with as well. For humanity, the implications were just as profound. Earth had always known that it was a dangerous place, a crucible that had shaped them into survivors. But they had never truly understood what that meant on a galactic scale until now. They were no longer the underestimated newcomers, no longer just another race in the cosmic sea. They were a Deathworld species. And in a universe where strength dictated survival, that changed everything. Ward and his team returned to Earth not as emissaries, but as pioneers. The Deathworlder Pact was more than a diplomatic victory, it was a statement to the stars. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not weak. Humanity belonged. And should the galaxy ever forget that, they now had an army of Zalvoran warriors standing beside them, ready to remind anyone who dared to challenge them. Karvek, watching from his warship as the human vessels departed, knew in his heart that the galaxy had shifted. He had spent his life believing that the Zalvoran were alone in their struggle, the only true warriors in a universe of weakness. But no longer. A slow, satisfied growl rumbled in his chest as he turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We have much to discuss with our new allies." For the first time in Zalvoran history, they were not expanding alone. For the first time, they had brothers in arms. And the universe would never be the same again.